Jennifer Lester, who's a very special guest today. So Jennifer and I have been working together for many, many years, primarily with the Seraphim Singers. And so I invited Jennifer to talk to us today a little bit about the history of her ensemble and what it's been like. And this is the 22nd season and the 22nd virtual season. And just talk a little bit about what that whole process has been like in this life in music. So take us back to 1998, I suppose it must have been. How did it all start?
Well, it started actually, Richard Bunbury, and most of you may know him, when he was getting, I think, he was getting a master's degree of some sort at BU that involved taking a course. It was an early music type course where a class project, everyone had to unearth a piece of, some sort of piece of choral music or whatever had never been published, and transcribe it from whatever old notation it was in into modern notation and arrange for performing forces and put it on as a little concerty thing over at BU. It was probably at Marsh. And so a bunch of us got together to sing this piece, and it was a lot of the usual suspects who you see in these church circles. Margaret Angelini was part of it, Michael Burgo, Taras Lashishin. I think it was a lot of Catholic cantors and whatnot at the time, because we all knew each other. And we had such a good time that a year later, I had thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And Marie Stultz actually said to me at a workshop when she said, you're really talented. I said, well, how come I can't get a gig, with some chorus? I send in every resume. And she said, just start your own. I was like, oh, duh, I could have had a V8. So I called all these people up and said, and was calling them, we didn't have email, and said, let's start the group. I'm starting the group. So we got 16 singers together. And in 97, I think was the first concert, which was over at St. Mary's in Dedham, if I remember correctly.
Well, this might be, you talking about that time makes me think that was also the time of the Boston Bach Ensemble, right? So it seems
yes.
a lot of the same people were swirling around in that same circle.
Yes, the members, I sang with the Boston Bach Ensemble for a bit, and really, really enjoyed that. That was a good challenge for me as a singer, when you're three on a part, and you have to decide between you, who's going to breathe where in those long lines in the motets.
If at all.
Yeah. Matter of fact, Julian Walker and I had been friends for a while, and he was one of the first people we commissioned. I think the first was, might not have been him. I have my notes here. It was the first commission. Got into the commissioning thing pretty early on. Our first premiere was actually a fellow who's getting a doctorate at BU, Ron Maltese, who's gone on to teach in, I believe he's in New Mexico somewhere. He's teaching musicology. He had been a student of Lucas Foss. And we premiered his doctoral piece, which was variations on Veni Creator Spiritus. And then I guess it was the first commission was at the Lighting of the Lamps, which of course we returned to many times. Alison's played it, you've played it, and recorded it. And Elliot Geiger got involved somewhere along the line, and he's another composer who is finishing at Harvard. He and his wife, who's an equally amazing singer and clarinetist. He wrote, well, Hebrew, Latin, Greek was a big Everest to climb for us. And that was another one of our commissions. We've received a couple of Kane grants for commissions. One was when we commissioned Avner Dorman for a piece, and also for, what was the other thing? Oh, Carlisle Sharp, who also was in town. And that was the piece called Peace, P-E-A-C-E, on one of the Gerard Manley Hopkins texts. So that's sort of our early commissioning history. That would have been 2004.
So Kane is Choral Arts New England, which is a wonderful organization. Some of you will remember Bud Patterson, Alfred Nash Patterson. So I think that's how that money came into that whole thing was set up, and they give out grants for things like commissioning new pieces. So you founded your new very own ensemble so you could do whatever you wanted. So talk to us about what particular position do you feel like Seraphim occupies in Boston's choral landscapes, because there's so many groups. And so what do you think as the defining features of Seraphim as opposed to all of the rest of us?
Right. Well, when we started, it was almost entirely church musicians, either directors or singers or organists or whatever. And in a way, it started almost like continuing education for us, because we wanted to do some works that most of our choirs were not really up to doing. Most of us didn't have paid section leaders and things like that. So we were attacking a lot of the repertoire that we would love to do but couldn't. And it started with that, and we had made a commitment to new music right from the get-go, new music for the church. And our original mission statement was maybe 6 words: sacred music and sacred spaces. So that was where we started, and the new music was particular emphasis, and merging in local composers. And as time went by and we started to attract some more singers and our audiences, we knew we were always going to be niche. So we thought, you know, what is it? Be what you are, because if you be what you ain't what you is. What we were church musicians, and we felt we had a spiritual aspect to this as well as a musical one, because all of us, one way or another, had come into church music because of an experience we had that maybe let us connect to the divine through music in church, or music we experienced in church. So that was also sort of a driving thing that took a while for me to realize had always been there and to connect to. And then the new music became important, and then eventually the social scene and social justice issues started also bubbling up with all the changes taking place in the new millennium, and we started to respond to that as well, programming particularly more women composers. And now we'll be pivoting also and trying to the equity, inclusion, access aspects of things in the future once we are back live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about your overall programming philosophy, if you would. So, you know, you sort of started from the sacred space, as it were, and then how that's, you know, you talked a little bit already about how it's developed over the years, but what are your thoughts on particularly, you know, staying committed to programming almost exclusively sacred music, and what do you think are the challenges and kind of the wonderful things about doing that?
Well, for one thing, if you can limit your choices, it's a little freeing. Otherwise, there is so much music out there. Where do you start? And somewhere along the line, I realized that and it's like the more you do something, the more your craft kind of hones and you focus in. I started getting more thematically oriented, and this sort of piece I really wanted to do, and then building a program around it, started getting a theme I wanted to explore, which might have been inspired by a piece, and going around that. So we got more into the thematic programming, which of course is rampant now. Everyone's looking at thematic programming, especially I think smaller ensembles that are able to do that. We're not, we don't perform often with orchestra. I think we've had orchestras twice, once for the St. John Passion and once for the Duraflay. So we don't have a need to fill large halls or expand our budgets to huge amounts. So we can be a little bit more nimble. We can take some chances. And thematic programming is not difficult with church music or with secular music. And I think we've started to push the boundaries a little bit on certainly how liturgical programming is, and defining not so much religious music as music with a spiritual aspect. There's been a lot more poetry in Seraphim's programming over the years compared to liturgical texts. I think it comes out this one way, it comes out that way. And what people seem to comment most on is this sort of thematic nature of the programming. And that seems to be almost a natural direction it's taken. I didn't think about it until I realized, looking back to write the 20-year history of the organization, how that had evolved also. Instead of, you know, German stuff, it was, you know, and when those programs was, and women's perspectives and all that, it was getting to be a lot more sort of organized, I guess.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed, as you say, a turn towards more social justice type of programming in the last few seasons. Was there a particular trigger for that, or did it develop organically?
There was something of a trigger when I stopped working at St. Paul's in Harvard Square, which was very much a very full-time job on top of Seraphim. I did take 1 year off and didn't play anywhere. And I got a chance to just sort of rest and think, and decide to put more energies into Seraphim. And also I'd been making promises to God for a long time, like, when I have more time, I'm going to follow for some good stuff. And I started at the Friday Cafe at First Church in Cambridge, which is a meal program for the homeless, which right now different form because of the pandemic, but provides a meal to volunteers and donations from restaurants, and we provide a meal for the homeless, and we're open from 1 to 4, so they get to hang out. It's not just coming to a window, picking up your bag and leaving like it more or less is now. And it gave me a chance to connect with that population and become more aware of their needs and how their needs are not only physical, and there are plenty of those, but their needs are also spiritual and social, and thinking of ways to support them and also connect with them. And we made that partnership with First Church, and the last couple of seasons we've been able to make tickets available for those guests, and you'd be amazed at the number of people that show up who are Friday Cafe regulars who know their music. There'd be a fellow who stopped me once. I was on my way out after a bow to come back for a second when he goes, "Schutz, was that Heinrich Schutz?" I was like, "You got it." So they're out there and they need to be served as well. And that was an issue I wanted to kind of open up and work with too.
I also think you've done wonderfully in sort of branching out your social justice perspective, as you were saying, that you've done several programs on women's perspectives and trying to incorporate more women composers overall. And as you're talking about this, expanding that further into racial justice and all these topics, I think is really a worthwhile thing. And maybe it's also sort of like a legacy thing, like what you were describing, making a promise to God that we all try to make a difference with whatever little thing it is we do to make the world a more beautiful and hopefully more meaningful place with making music. And a question from Sue, is this planning process of your programs, do you do it all on your own or collaboratively with your singers or with, also one thing I want to touch on, you turned Seraphim into a 501c3 quite a while back, and the sort of differences that has made in terms of not feeling you have to do it all on your own, but that you have some support structure. And I know Alison worked for Seraphim for a little while, so we can check in with her and ask about her experience in working in a fledgling nonprofit.
Yeah, well, let me see. There's a lot of things in that question.
I think I asked 5 questions at once. Let's start with Sue's. Is the programming planning a collaborative effort, or how do you approach it?
Well, there are times when it's been suggested that I have a programming committee, but back in the day when we did not have Zoom, just getting 5 people in the same room, or even getting people to, I might hear from people, I just ran across this piece, or I heard this the other day in the radio, maybe we should do it. So to some degree, I'll get input that way. But there are people I work with, but I don't convene a committee. I will tend to ask you, as you know, I'm thinking of such and such a theme. These are 3 pieces I've found so far. Does anything, spring to mind? And I think you put me on several things, but I can't remember if it was your idea to do Seek Him Who Maketh the 7 Stars by Jonathan Dove. Is that?
Love that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and then you ended up not being able to play it because the BSO came calling, and you don't say no to the BSO, but everybody loved singing that piece. And it's one of those things that makes you sway in the pew. So everybody loved that. And I'll ask Elliot Geiger, who has an amazing, amazing choral knowledge. Sometimes he'll write something for us. Sometimes he'll say, what would you put with X, Y, and Z? And you should look at A, B, and C. That's very helpful. Or I'll ask composers whose music I've run across, like Edie Hill, when I was looking for someone young and hungry and talented and female to write us something for was Women's Perspectives? No, it was Nevertheless She Persisted. She said, oh yeah, I know one, Shruti Rajasakar, who lives in the same city as Edie does, and that's how we found her. So network with composers. I have an advisory group. Carson Kuhlman's been an immeasurable help because he's another one with vast knowledge of the choral thing. So once I get a germ of an idea, I'm not afraid to reach out to my colleagues and friends and say, what would you put with this? And that's been very helpful. And the hardest thing sometimes is coming up with a theme. Sometimes if I find a piece first, great. If I don't, it took a long time to come up with whatever was the fall of 2016. I remember just taking walk after walk after walk and feeling like, I can't think of anything. And then finally the dam broke and things started to fall into place. So it can be scary, which is why I'm very, very bad at programming more than one season out. It takes me so long to put together a program. And then one thing you have to also think about is what order do you put things in? That big difference in thematic programming. And you have to take choreography into account. Do you have double choir? Do people have to move? Do we want to do one with the choir in the back? Do we want to cover our motion with letting our audience sing a hymn, which we've often done, or organ repertoire, which since there's so many organists in the group and that's our legacy and our background, I like including organ works because it's hard to get a lot of people to come to organ recitals. But if they hear one or two good organ pieces in a choral concert, they're there anyway. They might as well sit back and enjoy it. And who knows, maybe we're building an audience for the organ as well. So that's a lot of question one and maybe one other. What else did you ask?
A whole lot of mission work. Yeah, I kind of agree with you with that whole, also one aspect of Seraphim particularly is that you perform in vastly different spaces at times, right? So, and sometimes if you're repeating a program in two different venues, it'll be a radically different experience to hear it on Friday night, say at Elliott, or on Sunday in Cambridge, right? That the layout of the building and the acoustics and everything is just completely different. So that does make it tricky. And sometimes I know you've had to just change up the whole program order because in one place we had an intermission and not in the other. So it's always evolving, it seems.
Yes, a lot of it is a matter of, who taught me how to, that is John Dunn, because there's nothing he does better than run a Busby Berkeley production. He's the only person I know who could take the service we used to do in early January around the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, which he always called the last Noel instead of the first Noel. And it involved the boys choir from St. Paul's, the adult choir from St. Paul's, and then there was, I think there was a third group involved too, but it was we call it three choirs, no waiting. And every hymn involved a choir choirs moving all over the place. I think maybe the handbells were involved as well. So we had to get those kids on and off the stage. So he was very good at the choreography. And I learned a lot just by watching him do what he did at the choir school. So yes, there's a lot of, okay, we're up at St. Cecilia's in the loft because we have these three accompanied pieces back to back. Let's have Alison and Heinrich play something while quietly and get down the stairs up to the front and sit for a few minutes till she finishes Debussy Syrinx or something, and then scoot into place and then down and play a continuo organ. It's a challenge, but it's really fun when it comes off.
So what's it been like working with the board? So how long has it been since you guys incorporated at this point?
It was, I think it was a couple of years in. I can't remember right now. It was the early 2000s. I had been running it as a DA, and it was time. So Margaret Angelini, I think, was acting as treasurer and basically running it out of a checkbook register and that sort of thing. But we did get that status, and I can't remember exactly, but it was well before Alison came in. I think Alison was probably the first chorus manager we had who, we actually labeled the position, and she was so helpful in those first few years and really helped, was a game changer on the marketing side and on the organization side, and took a lot off my plate, for which I am eternally grateful. And we haven't been able to manage without a person in that position since.
Yeah. So Alison, you got to invent the job as you were doing it, it sounds like.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think with, an organization like Seraphim, it's always got a kind of, all hands on deck kind of feel. And, a lot of different members of the choir bring different expertise to help out in different ways. So I felt like in a lot of ways I was just, kind of organizing other people to help out. So, but yeah, it was great fun and happy to do it.
I think one of Alison's great contributions was the video postcard. We were just getting to the point where we could do things like that. And she would look at the material I was doing and say, can you record these, 15 bars or so, this from A to B in this score, at a rehearsal early enough on for me to work with it. And she put together, I would call it a slideshow, wouldn't you, Alison? With, with stills and information about the concert, and information about the theme. I think particularly about I think it was the short century, when you found a lot of images of the different events we were commemorating. And that I think really kind of really pushed our whole marketing thing up. And I saved them all because they're just wonderful to look at and remember, you know, how the concert felt. And she was very good at capturing the feel of the concert well before the concert. So I think that communication, everybody got what was promised in the postcard. That's what we delivered. So that was a big step forward for us.
So you've basically had some sort of staff person ever since to take a little bit, as you say, off your plate.
Yes, we've had a couple right now. We hired for beginning this fall. Jason Linhart is our new marketing director and is a candidate for an advanced degree. I think a doctoral candidate in composition at BU, but he spent the last couple of years full time managing marketing and whatnot for Urbanity Dance, which is a modern dance group in town. And what to do was move when the lockdown came. He moved their entire gala online. I thought, this is what we need. Who understands music and composition, who can just pivot to this tech stuff without, you know, I thought, well, I think we're going to be buying more hours from him when we started, but we're going to need to. So he's and he has to, he's taken a drink from a fire hose as far as learning about the group, but I think he was the right person to appear at the right time, and will be helpful. And it got me interested in further collaborations. We've done collaborations with the choruses, but I thought, oh, a collaboration with dancers would be wonderful. And I came to actually, I think I came to conducting through dance. I studied dance ever since I was a kid. I studied mostly Isadora Duncan's School of Dancing. I studied with one of her first pupils, who was Austrian, and taught in my hometown every summer. And that involved a lot of improvisation and, you know, full expression and a certain amount of choreography, but it was very expressive. And, you know, this is the sort of thing I'm attracted to. Dancers love to work with live music. How often do they have the budget for that if they're not a ballet company? So I'm interested in exploring some of the spaces we work in with a dance troupe, and the right program and the right material. It could be really exciting stuff to try.
It sounds like you're really chomping at the bit to get back into the fray of all of this.
Well,
tell us what you're doing right now with virtual concerts, and are you getting together to rehearse at all, or how are you managing this current madness?
Well, yeah, actually, I was tired and burnt out enough in the spring that I said, you know, let's not knock ourselves out. Sometimes there's a desperate edge for the arts organizations to stay relevant and to stay present. And I understand the pressures, particularly on big organizations with big budgets, whose people they want to keep employed as any way possible. Seraphim seemed to have a different approach about it. I think more of us were ready for a Sabbath of some sort. I certainly was. And also to give myself a chance to just sort of recharge my batteries and just rest so I could come back to programming, because I was starting to feel a little, you know, burnt out on it. Taking a actual sabbatical from Seraphim, since we don't need to rehearse anyway. And for these virtual programs, my biggest job is just making sure that all the recordings we have are track marked and accessible and edited if necessary, and get them on Dropbox. And the singers have come up with ideas for the little podcasts that we're producing. I'm trying to give them some ideas. They could pick a little theme. They could pick their favorites, and I'll help them figure out a theme. We've had a couple so far. We have several more in the pipeline. And our marketing guy is putting on, you know, videos and stills and that sort of thing to create a video component, since we only audio recorded most of our concerts. We have one coming up on the Women's Perspectives and Nevertheless She Persisted program. And there's actually an interview that's been filmed between Richard Clark and Shruti Rajasakar and myself that will be aired before we put their two big pieces up, which were The Samaritan Woman at the Well. It's called A Woman of No Distinction, that piece that Richard Clark wrote a couple of years ago, and Shruti's piece called Nevertheless, which takes its text from the words in the Congressional Record. It's really kind of fascinating. It's not a poem, it's not a biblical passage, it's just the words Mitch McConnell said.
It's C-SPAN.
It's C-SPAN. It's C-SPAN, you know? And I'm sure to Mitch's chagrin it was that Nevertheless She Persisted has now become a battle cry. So that's basically what we're doing. And I think once January is passed, I'll probably be ready to start thinking about programming again. But at least I feel like I've got some big overarching ideas, and now it's a matter of distilling them into, facts on the ground, or in my case, pieces on a piece of paper. That'll work.
So what kind of platforms are you using for the virtual programs? Is it a live premiere? Or you just post them at a certain date and then people can watch them whenever? Do you have an interactive thing going on when you first unveiled them?
No, we didn't have that much going on. It'll eventually evolve. Our first goal really was to get something out there, and it was easy enough to do just podcasts. We're not rehearsing. We're not doing any live stream. It's just they're announced in like a email, and then they're available, and we'll keep them up for a certain amount of time. And once we have to make sure we clear the permissions, and that can be kind of thorny. So we're being careful about what we use right now. But in a way, we're lucky. We've got a lot of public domain material and also a lot of stuff that we commission that's not necessarily published. And so we can just get the composer's permissions. It's the stuff that falls in the cracks that we have to work a little harder. But we're keeping it fairly simple for now. And as Jason gets his chops up for what he's doing, I'm sure he'll come up with ideas and bells and whistles to gussy that up.
And we can all find that wonderful content by going to seraphimsingers.org, where it's all ready for the viewing. Questions from the floor?
I have one. Go ahead,
All
Gala.
right, Alison, then Carol.
I've just been asking all my musician friends these days, what are you listening to these days?
Oh, my favorite station for especially later in the evening has become WMHT out of Schenectady, New York. And I picked them up because in Lennox, they come in loud and clear. They also get programming from Minnesota Public Radio, which, as we know, is probably the best, widest ranging public radio. Nobody in the public radio here, or even Harvard at least will play choral music. GBH basically won't touch it, or they'll silo it. I mean, CRB. And MHT and certainly Minnesota. Oh, why wouldn't you play choral music? I mean, it's Minnesota, the land of 10,000 choirs. And I find that their programming, especially later in the evening, is marvelous. Steve Seal in particular. And I highly recommend listening to his show, Extra Eclectic, which is obviously new stuff. He does it live on Wednesday nights. It's on late, 11 to 1. But about 2 days, usually by Friday or Saturday, you can find it on Minnesota Public Radio's stream and just listen to it there. Marvelous, marvelous stuff. So what we find that we do here is along about 10 o'clock in the evening, a bell goes off. We close the offices. He closes his computer. I close up mine. We plots in the living room and turn on the radio station and listen to that. Because that's when they're playing anything from Steve Reich. They played some Paratan yesterday. How often do you get to hear Paratan? It's really something.
Never.
Yeah, and one of their other announcers in Schenectady, she just played it. She's like, this is really cool. You have to hear this piece. They hold this one note for 100 measures. So it's neat to hear. And a lot of they're importing a lot of stuff from Minnesota Public Radio, which you can get just a plain choral stream on, which is worth it if you like choral music. So I'm not listening to pieces as much as I'm letting pieces come to me, and I've found them a great source.
Jennifer, can I mention, I have been listening a lot to that Minnesota Public Radio. And for people who are interested, Minnesota Public Radio calls it the choral stream. So it's called choral stream. It's 24/7 choral music. And what's interesting about it is a lot of Minneapolis, St. Paul based choral groups and some really interesting local composers there. Lots of Stephen Paulus you'll hear on that. On the choral stream, but it's wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's fabulous.
Carol had a question?
Yeah, I had a question about, you mentioned getting permission. How much are royalties for your group to sing or perform somebody's new composition? I mean,
well, when we're performing them live, we just do it all through ASCAP. it's easy. You just file a quarterly report with ASCAP. You tell them everything you did and how big your venue was and how much money you made, and they dole it out to the composers. As far as and with commissions, it's a different thing. You negotiate a fee, and that usually the right to perform is usually once you bought the music, you can perform it live. And you know, so it's the streaming that's thrown, you know, sort of upset the apple cart for a lot of us and made it a lot more difficult. And I let legal look into that, but I'm trying to be careful and not you know, try to sneak under the radar. It's next to impossible.
We have a copyright lawyer on the program, Betsy.
Oh, good.
She can offer consultations for a modest fee.
Betsy.
It's the American Association Society of Composers and Publishers. So they're one of the licensing operations. There's also BMI, which is Music International. You know, it's always very confusing who belongs to what and who are you supposed to file with. Copyright law is just such a jungle. Sylvia, you had a question?
Well, I wondered, Greg, you said you listen here to Minnesota Public Radio. How do you get it?
I get it through I just go to Minneapolis. I go to minnesotapublicradio.org. And
Oh, I see. You're
Minnesota
not talking
Public-
about a radio program then. You're not talking about listening in on your radio. You're on your computer. Okay.
That's on my computer or on my smartphone,
Yeah.
depending on how I want to do it.
Yes.
Minnesota
new
Public
wireless.
Radio has a number of different streams. So what I've done is I just have bookmarked on my computer, Minnesota Public Radio choral stream. I don't want to listen to their other programs. I just want to do the choral stream.
Yeah.
So flag it on your computer.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Oh, go ahead. Somebody else had a question, right?
Yes, do we have another question? I think we're all squared away. So here we are, a half hour flies by, as I always say. So Jennifer, thank you so much for telling us about all your wonderful adventures. And we look forward to everything returning live whenever that is. In the meantime,
Amen to that. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for showing up.
thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful
Thank you,
week.
Jennifer.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jennifer.